start late, right? So, good morning, everyone. And I usually have it written down which week, but I think this is week 9 since October the 7th, and therefore the 8th week we have done these Fridays. So, welcome, and
hello.
I've just lost time.
Judy?
Yes. Oh, you're there. Where have you gone? Okay. Oh, there you are. Fine. Okay. I'm going to bring you on now before I lose you again. Your screen has... Oh, you've moved. Okay.
Yours? Listen. Yeah.
Right. So thank you all for joining us this morning. And especially, obviously, Haim, who's presenting today.
Am I back? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Because I lost you for a few minutes and I was a little bit worried about that.
Okay, fine. So over the week since we've last met, I found this a particularly difficult week, obviously not counting the first couple of weeks, because we had all the glimmers of hope with the ceasefire and the hostages being released, and now we seem to have sadly gone backwards. At least that's how it feels to me. That's just a personal statement. I'm sure everyone has their different feelings. And of course, we've come to Hanukkah. So let me start by saying happy Hanukkah, and the fact that it's a festival of light makes us hopefully hopeful. As I keep saying each week, what's proved so important since October the 7th is this connection of us being together, either in the building or on Zoom, and particularly on this Friday morning where we're connecting with Israel. As usual, or for those of you that are new, we will have questions at the end if there is time, and I will present those, so please put them in the chat or email me. So let me tell you a little bit about Haim for those of you who didn't see it on the web. He's the former director of the travel seminars of the Florence Melton Adult Mini School. I haven't said that out loud for many years. I was the director of Melton here in London, so Haim and I worked together for many years, and he is the best. So Haim, I know this is a really difficult task we're asking you for, but share with us what's uppermost on your mind this morning, and perhaps what you envisage coming in the coming week. But let's start with the first one. Over to you. Great.
Okay, I won't talk about what I'm envisaging for the coming week for the moment. I will start by saying to all of you, Hanukkah Sameach, with the qualification that I think that everyone in Israel has, and maybe in the whole of the Jewish world has with this particular Hanukkah. The feeling is Hanukkah Sameach, given the circumstances. How do you use the word happy right now? And certainly in Israel, the visual image that I can perhaps try and convey things to you through is of a Hanukkah, a Chanukiah that was established in Tel Aviv that was lit yesterday with 138 branches. And you're saying to yourselves, why Israelis, why do they always have to have more than anyone else? And it's obvious to you that the number is based on a light being lit for each of those people who is being held in captivity at the moment. So the sense of this Hanukkah, perhaps I'll add another image for you from Israeli TV once again. And I don't know what's been taken by the BBC or Sky or anything else from these. And I'm sure that it would be very different in the way it's presented in those media. But one of the images from late yesterday afternoon, because Hanukkah is coming in, as in the UK, very early, being close to the end of December, was of a massive Hanukkah in the middle of Gaza City. So what do you do with that image? How do you want to relate to that? And there's no doubt that in the themes of Hanukkah, on the one hand, the festival of light, and on the other hand, a theme that comes over and over again, Bayamim Haim Bazman Hazeh, in those days as in these days, and the battle of many, or the battle against many by the few, each of those themes, light, those days and our days, and many and few, each of those three themes has been played up not even as a matter of manipulation, as propaganda for internal consumption, as much as a matter of our society attempting to address this, has been an horrific period these last 2 months, in a manner of giving ourselves some sort of tools from within our cultural tradition as well. I hadn't intended starting in that way. I'll come back to the last 24 hours, but I need to make one or two disclaimers. And one of them is that I am just one of the many, many voices that one can hear in Israel. And I'm a voice that now, not having any, being at the age of, I don't know if I can call myself a retiring person, but being at that age means that I suppose that all of you also having this time available on a Friday morning means that for many of you also, you can pick and choose how you use your time. And I would have picked and chosen to be working now, leading people around parts of the country in the way that I would have wanted to do. But all of that has basically become, I said to my wife last night, she said, you're going to soon have to deal with 2023 in your new status as a small business. And I said, I'm going to declare my business bankrupt and closed for the year, because the events of the year since I retired have simply prevented me from doing any kind of work in this year. So let me make my disclaimer a little bit more strongly as being this one single voice within a mass of a society. It's not only a single voice, it's also a voice which is probably in the minority in Israeli Jewish society, and is even a minority in Israeli society in general. And you can pause for a moment and say, what's that distinction about? And perhaps when you pause, you'll realize that I'm talking about a society of which the Jews make up 80% of the society and not 100%. But we are a majority society, a majority Jewish society. And the reason why I've been living here for close to 50 years is my belief that that's where I wanted to dictate the decisions of my own life. I am a father, a husband of the woman that I went a few moments ago to say when I thought that the mixer was causing the trouble with my reception. So I said, please don't bake that cake that you're trying to bake for Shabbat, in case the electricity is being harmed by it. And any of you who can get here in time are welcome to join us for a special cake for Shabbat. But Sandy is a psychologist, and he has another aspect that I hadn't even intended relating to, but it's insightful perhaps for you. She's a clinical psychologist, having worked in the field for 45 years, nearly 50 years. She's retired as well. And Sandy found herself, in fact, she said to me again yesterday, now with a moment of anger actually, that the work that she's been doing volunteering for the last nearly 2 months, working with those youngsters who'd been at the music festival, where Israel, since the first few days, a week or maybe 10 days after the 7th of October, they began a framework of having those who had come out of it being invited to come. They could come with one other person only or by themselves. And they basically came to safe space where they could do anything from having tattoos to therapy, to physical therapy, to mental therapy, to music, to dancing, whatever they wanted. But safe space from 4 p.m. until as late as they wanted. And every night in the first few weeks, a prominent Israeli, either individual or group, came to give them a concert. And it was quite phenomenal, actually, what was going on there. But Sandy, my wife, says to me, 2 months later, I say as a clinical psychologist that we're doing more damage by continuing the framework, because by now they have to be in other frameworks, and many of them are in therapy. So that was the person downstairs that I've just related to. But I'm also the father of 3. All 3 have served in the army. One of them is in the army right now. And I can say that we looked for him with a moment of consternation when he was standing right next to Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday on TV, because Netanyahu visited the Northern Command, and that's where he serves, and he serves in a position that is sensitive enough that he was able to stand next to the Prime Minister. But he's not an officer or anything. I don't want to give him more credit than you may think, than I think that he deserves. So I'm a parent who's involved. And that brings me to another associative response, which has nothing to do with the investment of energy, when I thought to myself, what would I want to share with you? Because these are the events of the last 24 hours. I, as a parent who is involved, know what it means for my son to be where he is. Yesterday in the late afternoon, in the middle of the newscast, excuse me for being a little bit emotional about it, we'll come back to emotion as one of the categories I'd like to address with you. In the middle of the newscast, they announced that one of the 5 soldiers who fell yesterday was the son of the former chief of staff and a minister in this emergency government. And you all will probably know that news even from the BBC, but certainly if you follow Israeli news more closely. And Gadi Eisenkot's son, Gadi Eisenkot, had spent his whole career as someone who saw the defense of the country as the central responsibility that he had. And he rose to the most senior position in the army. And is one of our central politicians who will emerge even more strongly if and when the government will change or we go to elections. But he's serving in this makeshift government that is an emergency government right now. And he happened to be in the command headquarters, observing and advising and learning about what was going on as his son was killed. So when I say that I'm the parent of a soldier who's in the Northern Front, some of you are saying, oh, that's nowhere near Gaza. And others of you are saying, well, that's where the next problem's coming. And still others of you need to see each voice that you hear from Israel, if they are in such contexts, as being that decisions that one makes are decisions in which the lives of one's own family are very centrally involved. And it's a moment of clarity on the one hand and of deep pain on the other, when I bring in something that I couldn't possibly have known that I would be saying to you this morning, even 24 hours ago. By the way, Eisenkot, the day before his son was killed, was in a meeting in which he said, I understand where you people are coming from. I have a son who's a soldier as well. Little did he know what he would have to say one day later. So let me move on then, having made some disclaimers. Don't listen to me as any kind of expert. Do listen to me as another voice that has to be put in context of all those other voices. And I would say very much that just as you maybe have chosen to give this half hour or 45 minutes of your time to listening to a voice from Israel, at no cost at all, you can read the Times of Israel, which is probably one of the most balanced and reasonable perspectives that you can get in the English language on what's going on in Israel from within. And the fact that it seems to be very critical of the government now, or doesn't seem to be, but is very critical of the government, is more of an indication of what's happened in Israeli society and politics than of a centrist paper, electronic paper, being seemingly sometimes radical anti and to the left of the government. Because the criticism coming from someone who speaks in English very, very easy for you people to appreciate, David Horowitz, who I think is a very, very fine editor and critic, the criticism of that paper shifted drastically, radically, at the point where what seemed to be centrist was being branded as being anti-patriotic. So you can choose where you want to go to. You can also say, I want to watch the BBC because the BBC has always been the place to go to for the news. But if you're going there, you're also aware of how to deal with those biases that seem to be part of the policy of the BBC as well. I'm very careful about pointing thumbs and fingers at who is biased and anti and so on and so forth. And yet, in the last few days, it seems easier to point those fingers sometimes, even if you want to defend each person's right to say what they want to say. And of course, I'm jumping once again from what I'd intended addressing with you by saying that that interview in the United States with those 3 college presidents, including a little-known college established by the governor of Massachusetts when Britain ruled over the colonies, called Harvard. The outrage seems to be totally justified. It was just a few weeks ago that someone said there was a cartoon that came out in which the person goes and applies for a job and he says, oh, and I forgot to mention that I'm not a graduate of Harvard, in the hope of getting the job. And it seemed to be an unfair dig at the university. I think the president of Harvard is now feeling pretty bad about the manner in which she presented herself before the US Congress committee the other day. So let me move on a little bit. And I will have to keep the clock that I put in place and then covered in mind. And Judy, perhaps I'll keep your face there to see. When I see lots of dismay on your face, then I'll know that I've got to move faster. And I'll say this, you don't need me to tell you that the players that we need to look at when we're looking at the situation include Israelis, but I call it Israelis. And once again, I say, keep in mind that when you say Israelis, you're talking about 80% of the population, but when you're talking about the other 20%, at the moment, there's a distinction that's being made inside Israeli society between Druze, Bedouin, and other Arab populations. And that's partly because in the talk shows on Israel, which go on almost 24 hours a day on 3 channels at the moment about the war, so they're all the time interviewing people, amongst one of the more prominent voices is a full general who's a Druze. He's now retired, so he can appear as a political and military commentator. But a Druze who reaches the rank of being the head of the whole of the armored corps before his retirement or before he's moving from that position, as is now happening, is an indication of the place of the Druze in the military. Keep that in mind if we have the time when we want to look at societal issues towards the end of our very, very short session. But Israelis are one of the players. What about the Palestinians? How do we distinguish there? And I have to say that we need all the time to keep in mind when we talk about the other, or always keep in mind that we need to have the other in our minds as well. It's so easy for me with all the anger, resentment, fear, hatred, all of those emotions to just talk about us. But how do I manage to look at the other in a manner that allows me in the long run to be able to address things as well? Because in the long run, that was Judy's challenge for me. When she said, for me, I'm saying the coming week is the long run. You remember Alan Sillitoe's book? It's a lonely run that we may have. The long distance runner has a long, long way ahead of itself. So how in Israel, when we're looking at the other, do we look at the Palestinians? And can we, for any moment, allow ourselves to take Hamas and the term that was created in the early stages of the war, Hamas is ISIS? How do we manage to know that many of the individuals that we see may bear responsibility for the poor ability, the poor decisions in terms of fighting a regime or opposing a regime, but many of those people are not Hamas people. If there are 30,000 soldiers who are Hamas soldiers, there's a population of over 2 million people with hundreds of thousands of people in the conditions which you understand better than me, in a sense, or maybe not. You certainly see them on your TV screens more than I do. It's hard to distinguish between a TV image and the reality that is beyond it, but there's no doubt that the destruction that you're seeing day after day is, it is catastrophic. There's a third category of players here, and that's the Jews around the world. And you people are giving up your bit of time this morning because of that sense of things. And you know about the march in Washington, or the gathering in Washington, which was the day before it took place. I have family, both on my wife's side and other parts of the family, who are American. And many of them on the American side had the feeling that that rally was going to be catastrophic because they would never get more than a few tens of thousands of people. And in fact, what happened was it reflected a pulse that was beating there, and a sense of identification with the situation that exceeded everyone's expectations. The sense since then of isolation from many people around you has been the, I would say, almost the burden of diaspora Jews wherever you may be. And in that sense, we in Israel have an advantage over you. We have the comfort of being part of the majority. And and that's why I say we have to keep in mind the minority. The international players, you know that your prime minister came, you know that the statements that came out of England in the beginning were very, very supportive. And you know what goes on in each of the countries. And there's unfortunately this division between West and East, which has come back into play. It won't seem to be that clear a distinction if Donald Trump should be re-elected in the next few months and then carry out what he's talking about, and take America back to an isolationist policy, along with all of the other things that the man represents. Those of you who are pro-Trump, I apologize if I step on your toes. I promise you, Judy will confirm for you that the weight that I carry is so light that your toe won't be much thrown out of place. But the international players who call on whatever they call for in the Arab world, I'm now going in circles beyond us, and then beyond that to Europe, and from there to the United States as well. So each of those players has its own role to play in the manner in which we in Israel are responding to things. And of course, the international bodies. Ben-Gurion said in the 1950s, which stands for UN in Hebrew, Umot Mu'chadot, Shmum. And you don't have to speak Yiddish, I don't speak Yiddish, to know what he was saying when he said Shmum. He basically was saying, the dogs can bark and the caravan will continue. But he also said that without the United Nations, we can't function. And a Cambridge-educated politician and diplomat by the name of Aubrey, or Abba Eban, once said that the United Nations decision for partition was more important even than Israel's declaration of independence, because it gave us international legitimacy. It's so hard for us in Israel to look at the UN right now. It's so hard for us to look at an organization like the Red Cross and say, how can an international organization like that have failed for so many weeks to have its voice even heard? And I'm sure that behind the scenes, many things were being tried. But things that are behind the scenes sometimes also need to be seen in front of the stage, on stage, center. And when you go beyond that into the other movements, which are not international formal movements, but obviously the movements which are the Black Lives Matter, and you and Me Too, and all of those organizations, and the sense of isolation that we in Israel have felt as we've looked. I say, as someone who, I'm not an academic, but I worked at the university for 25 years. And I speak to people, colleagues and friends, and the sense of isolation and betrayal that Israeli academics have felt, most particularly those who believed that they were part of an international community of like-minded people. They were prepared to address Israeli actions very critically. They were prepared to be outspoken on all sorts of issues regarding the Middle East. And they find themselves without even having the support for such things as women's rights, which are the ABC of 21st century international politics. So you can get a Nobel Prize for in climatic conditions, But sometimes you fail totally as a Nobel laureate when it comes to moral decisions on issues beyond the ken of a Scandinavian kid. I never thought I would badmouth the achievement of a Scandinavian kid in that manner. What are the facts then on the ground, really? We have to keep in mind that when we look at the other on the Gaza side, I separated early on between Hamas and the rest of the population. But I don't delude myself. The vast majority of the Palestinians and the Gazan residents who were not going to be part of Palestine, even in 1947 by that same partition plan, the vast majority of them certainly are not pro-Israel and are most likely to be in the category, which may be a category that was encouraged and created and then nurtured in a manner that is sui generis, that has never happened with any other population of refugees. But that sense of Palestinian refugees in the wake of the War of Independence is so strong that the kid that you see of 6 or 7 years old may still be saying, I'm actually from Jaffa, even though his great-grandfather or her great-grandmother was kicked out of Jaffa or fled from Jaffa 75 years ago. So the weight of that population and its self-identity has to be kept in mind. And that's why I don't delude myself for a moment that any actions that we take are going to lead to us being beloved. The question then becomes, what actions do we take in order for us to look at ourselves in the mirror? But first and foremost, you have to survive in order to see yourselves in the mirror. And so, very briefly, you can go back without my assistance, but I would say that if you take for yourselves 47, 48, and the creation of that massive influx of people into the Gaza area in the wake of the War of Independence, and they really were refugees, and the fact that they were kept in their camps there because Egypt refused to say they will become absorbed into Egyptian society. And by the way, I understand Egypt. I understand why King Hussein never wanted to absorb them into Jordan, but had to absorb them. And half of the Jordanian population is actually Palestinian. But in Egypt, they made sure, and they're still making sure in 2023 and 2024. I suspect, there's talk now behind the scenes that that's what the Americans are pushing the Egyptians towards, absorbing them across the Gaza-Egypt border in the Rafah district. But Egypt's been very careful to make sure, and the Arab world has made sure, that they've remained refugees with a unique status in all of United Nations relating to refugee situations since the establishment of the UN. So the 47, 48 is one point. 67 becomes another point when all those people suddenly become under Israel again. And between then and the point where we withdraw, there's a time when Israel tries to settle the area. And in parentheses, I hope you can hold the parenthesis in your head for just a moment. There are Israeli citizens right now are saying, let's go back to being in Gaza. And yesterday I spoke to a 90-year-old person in Australia, and he said to me, that can't be more than a few fringe individuals. And beyond that, 2005, when Israel withdraws. Since then, the rise of Hamas, the question of the Palestinians who didn't support Hamas, the political figures that Hamas knocked out and murdered in order to make sure that their rule was full, is the picture that has led to the rise of what was a small organization, much smaller than Hezbollah when we last had a major altercation, and now a force that Israel, after 63 days, has still got well over, maybe as much as 3/4 or more of their force to fight against. I want to move to one last category.
Yeah, 2 more sentences, Haim.
Okay. I want to use then 2 images for you. We are a society that is suffering now. We are deep in a state of trauma and grieving. And those emotions, as important as they are, help you understand it's a collective trauma that is marking Israeli society right now. The second point is that in looking at Israeli society right now, remember that the present government was bolstered by the entrance of the center group, the center party, Gantz's party, who felt a responsibility in a state of war that he could not stand by. And he and Eisenkot, the recently bereaved figure that I mentioned at the beginning, are part of the cabinet, the war cabinet. But Israeli society is by no means post its divisions. In fact, we're only before the divisions that will come the moment that we have a ceasefire in effect, a full ceasefire in effect. And that's why we cannot look at this as a situation where, isn't it wonderful how the war has brought us all together? And we have to remember that what will happen is that the issues that have been swept under the carpet over these 2 months will re-emerge with a vengeance, most particularly if the politicians who see their lives as politicians, their political careers, as being endangered, can only manage to hold on to the power by stoking up the old problems of pre-October 7th. Too long an introduction, I think, and with just a few minutes for your questions. And I'm sorry.
We won't take questions today. I'll pass on to you the ones there were, but they're quite long questions as well. So I'm going to say thank you and apologize that I don't let these run over. The Haim, you're wonderful, and the introduction was important because that placed where we are today, which is what we needed as well. We can't, as you said, we can't always just look at 8 weeks. We are in the day we are today and focus on it, particularly because of it being the first day of Hanukkah. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to see you. I wish it wasn't under these circumstances. I hope we can meet up again next year and be more positive and have seen that we've come through the other side of this. Take care.
And my apologies to you people for a monologue instead of some sort of question and answer session.
We have both, and we're happy with both. Thank you. And
so I wish you a Shabbat Shalom on the English side as well.
Shabbat Shalom to you and Sandy, and Hanukkah Sameach.
Shabbat
Shalom to everyone on screen. Thank you again for coming. Look forward to seeing you next week. And take care, everyone. Take care. Goodbye, all.